Do you want to learn how to tune electronic fuel injection live in person with the guys from RealTuners? We have 2-day courses in dyno shops all across the country. You can register for these at RealTuners.com and click on RealTuners Live Classes. For more information or to make a reservation, go to RealTuners.com or message us on Facebook at RealTuners LLC. Now, about those classes, when are they, you might ask? Standalone EFI Level 1 course, February 23rd and 24th in Las Vegas at Revolution Streetcars. On March 2nd, a special 1-day advanced course at Dynocom Industries in Fort Worth, Texas. April 13th and 14th, a Level 1 EFI course at Endless Performance in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. April 27th and 28th, an advanced class at 417 Motorsports in Springfield, Missouri. May 18th and 19th, standalone EFI Level 1 class at 417 Motorsports in Springfield, Missouri. June 15th and 16th, a Level 2 advanced course in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at Endless Performance. And of course, we will be trying to schedule more classes and more dates throughout the year, so keep checking back for more info. The weather guy says it's really cold outside, so tonight we're going to give you the cold, hard facts about tuning. You ask us some questions, and we will give you some answers. Now, who exactly is this we that I'm talking about? Rye Klemp from Clapped Out, Bill Fowler of Big Hat Racing, Chad Reynolds of Bangshift.com, James Short of Shore Tuning, John Bewley of Little John's Motorsport Solutions, Mark Dahlquist of Throttles Performance, Scott Clark of RealTuners.com, Scott Evans of Helix Tuning, Tom Sewell of Fuel Injector Development, Dan Parker, the movie star. He's blind in one eye and can't see out the other. And possibly a few of our previous guest hosts will pop their heads in and chat as well. And as always, thanks for tuning in. Now let's get this show on the road. Hey, welcome back to another RealTuners episode. We are episode 74, it looks like, and we are very, very cold across the country, I understand, and sorry to hear that some people are freezing their butts off, but it's nice and toasty here inside my house, and I'm sure it is in all the other guys' houses. Let's bring them in, see if I can make them sound good here. Definitely on. I see it's not coming through. I got to figure out why. Give me a second. Here we go. Let's try that again.
Audio on Facebook?
There we go. Now I got it. I found out what happened. Now it should be there.
He's done. Push buttons. There it is. Capizzi in the house.
Oh, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming back. Now everybody should be able to hear. I see meters everywhere.
Jeez. Awkward moment.
Hey, there we go. Finally screwed one up, and I think I know why, so no big deal.
No, it's all right.
My professional audio friend will let you have one.
Yeah, I was going to say, I screw up all the time. Have at it. Nice. Good to be back. Oh, listen, look at all them dudes logging in. This is fun to watch when Scott's running it from his place and I'm just a participant. That's nice. See all my friends logged in. Matt Vaughn, Darce Laws is on here. Look at all you guys. Matt Sanford. Hey, what's up, everybody? Yeah, good to see all you dudes. Keith Varon is in here. Yeah. Thanks, Keith Farron. Everybody come back. It was just an audio glitch.
I see Tom Viggy's listening tonight, and he had messaged me last week. He'd like to be part of the show again. He really had a lot of fun last week when we were talking about.
Send him the dial-in info. Send him the deal.
He's got the login.
What's up, Bewley?
What's going on? Fashionably late, but I'm here.
Good job, buddy.
Yeah, but you need to be fashionably late because you need all the help you can get. On the fashion front, I mean.
Come on,
crank
dude.
up your volume, Evans. People are saying it's kind of quiet. I know you like to run things all in the middle.
I know what happened. Yeah. There you go. Try that.
They want to talk cold start tuning. Mike Perduto in the house. Dude was wearing shorts and
I don't know if everybody knows this, but Scott Clark actually has a nickname for his cold start tuning. Was that Keith Berry that gave that to you, Scott?
Oh, yeah, right. I was like, what was he talking about? No, Johnny Berry used to post videos. Back when we were tuning for Keith, he used to post videos. It's so funny because you'd think he'd post videos about how he was winning NMCA championships and all the Ducks events, Radio versus the World classes. But no, what was he most proud of? His he'd get up, it's 42 degrees here in Alabama, and look at this thing start up, and he'd start the car up by reaching through the window, and he's like a fresh minivan in the springtime. That's what he would say. Johnny Cold Start. Johnny Cold Start. That's right. Well, that's what the Proline guys used to call me because they always made fun of me because I cared about that stuff. But it was funny because I remember, what was it, El General? I got that car to run good, and the guy driving that said he was like, man, my wife could take this thing to the grocery store now. And I'm like, man, if you pay for fuel injection, then the damn thing should drive that way. Your wife should be able to drive it. But anyway.
Well, and here's one big problem that guys that don't appreciate that will never understand until it bites them in the ass, is when they're in the water or they're pulling up to the starting line or they've done a big long burnout and they have some issue and the thing dies and then the piece of shit won't start. Well, you know what? If they had it tuned right, the thing would hit it, you'd hit it and it would fire up like a Honda. You'd flood clear the thing or whatever and it would be fine. And that's when you start to appreciate that stuff. And, that kind of goes to the conversation you and I have had a million times, Scott, which is every one of these engines, no matter what power adder is on them, when they're sitting there, not rotating at all, they don't know about any of the rest of the crap that's bolted to them. And when you hit the starter button, it's just a naturally aspirated engine. It might be bigger than the one in your Honda, but it's just an engine, and it only wants to do two things: run or sit still. Those are the only two choices. So it's not that big a deal to make one of these things idle and start cold.
We may have to talk about cold start tuning tonight, especially since we got Dahlquist on here. I wish we were prepared for this, Mark, because Mark actually posted up a video. Oh, it was a couple years ago, but him reaching through the window and his coolant temp was, what was it, like minus 21 or minus 14 or something?
It was like -4. It wasn't that.
Oh, -4. That's all. My bad.
I should have done one. I should have done one today, except for the truck is in the warm shop, so it doesn't really count.
Yeah. I guess we'll have to talk about cold start tuning once we get into it. A lot of people asking about it. No, I'm all over that, man, and how to get that done. Mark, actually, I don't know. We might actually have you lead the charge on that one, Mark, because nobody beats the cold start Fargo, North Dakota. It's better than the freezing trucks we used to rent, freezers to put the stationary engines to test them in, to light them off. Couldn't get it down to as cold as you got. So.
Right, but
it's funny though. You talk about Fargo. It's so cold in most of the country. It's cold. I mean, I don't mean now, but generically speaking, throughout the year, you guys have cold days. Here on the West Coast, we have a problem with cold start because it's not cold enough to do cold start tuning repeatedly. Because once you fire the thing twice, the thing warms up, and then you got to wait a whole day before it's cold enough again to do any more tuning.
Jay Albert's my good buddy Jay, listen in.
So on that note, I had a Monte Carlo that I did an EFI conversion on, and it was a 580 horsepower 454 big block, and we converted over sequential multiport. And I did my cold starts. I would just let it sit for 8 hours, and I'd get one hit at it in the morning, and I'd take a data log of it. And I did that for like 3-4 days in a row, and I haven't touched it since.
That's awesome.
But that's the thing. what Scott Clark deals with, where you buy, say, an hour of his time to remote in, he's got an hour to figure it out. Not like, well, I'll look at it again tomorrow morning, you know. And that's where you get what you pay for with Scotty.
Amen. I'm sorry, I had myself muted there for a second. No, I'm all about the whole, if you bought EFI, that stuff needs to run like EFI.
but all of the cold start that I do is everything that Scott showed me. It just takes me longer.
Yeah, I teach it in class.
Everything takes longer. When Scott sits in my car, I feel like I need to tape him with a slow-mo camera because his fingers are moving over the keys. So that's like, what the fuck did you do, dude?
No, you know what's really bad is when you're on an engine dyno in the middle of the pole and he's sitting there adjusting the tune faster than the dyno sweeping, and it's like, Jesus Christ, do you really have 3 screens up right now and toggling back and forth? Yes, he does.
Well, yes. I mean, sometimes you're paying me to teach you. I go slow. Sometimes you're just paying me to do it. I mean, Dahlquist, you got to remember that was Engine Masters Challenge stuff. You had a lot on your plate, and so you were like, hey, just take care of this crap, please.
No, but what I'm saying is it's fun to watch someone who's really that good with a computer, because I have to slow down and think about it.
I've got people who went to my class now. It's funny, I'm watching the screen scroll by and I'm looking, there was an Anastasia picture in there and it's like, shit, she does that stuff as fast as I do now. It's ridiculous, some of these students, but it's fun. It's fun to kind of have moved on from being the guy to just bringing up the next crop of people that are good at it. So I'm having more fun with the classes than anything else, honestly. That's why I'm just doing 4 or 5 race cars a year and then trying to focus on getting people trained. So
Matt Sanford wants to know what kind of commanded fueling we're all commanding in North Dakota. The coolest ECT he's ever seen was 8 degrees. Well, where it says commanded fueling, you just turn the injector on.
Right, and leave it on.
Yeah, just turn it on, like an on-off switch, right?
Remember the cold start injector from the TPI stuff back in the day?
Yeah. I was just thinking about that. If I forget to plug in the IAT, it defaults to, -40 or some number like that?
Yeah.
In the ECU, and I realized, well, that might not be cold enough for up there right now.
I really honestly should have left my truck out overnight last night and did a cold start this morning, because that would have been interesting, because I don't know if I've ever started it at -34 degrees before without it being plugged in or anything.
Okay, now I'm not joking when I ask you guys this question. Like, what mix of coolant do you have to run in an engine that's going to be in weather that cold? Because I don't fucking care if the streets are lined with gold. I don't go there. Like, that shit ain't happening for Chad. So.
Yeah. 50-50 won't freeze up to -34 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's usually what we use, because to actually get the coolant to -34 degrees Fahrenheit in the engine block, it's going to have to be below -40, because the engine's always going to be a few degrees warmer than ambient anyway. So
okay, gotcha.
At a 50-50 mix, we really don't have trouble. It's when you get the coolant that's at like a 60% mix of water and it's only good to like -20 or -25, and then it turns to this slush, and you'll have radiators like with plastic tanks, and they'll push the tanks out from the tabs, and the radiators will start to leak, things like that. That's when you have an issue.
See, because all we run coolant for here, well, we run it because of hot, not cold, and we run it because it's good for your cooling system. So, I mean, most stuff, it's like, the other day, Cole had to put a thermostat in his pickup truck, and because it was throwing a check engine light because the thermostat was stuck open, and he's like, okay, well, we only have this like 1.5 gallons of antifreeze. Should I go get more? I'm like, no, dude, that's plenty. It doesn't matter, because we don't care. I mean, it gets below freezing here, but but for a few hours at a night,
Yeah, the biggest thing is make sure you're using distilled water.
Right. Because otherwise the corrosion is just horrible.
Yep.
Yeah, the crap that comes out of your faucet is not distilled and has all kinds of minerals and chemicals and things in it that do not work well inside of an engine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as Kyle Hunt pointed out, having even a 25% mix of antifreeze in there is corrosion inhibitors in the antifreeze, but it's still best to use distilled water because the minerals aren't in it. That you get the minerals interacting with aluminum and iron and all the other various metals that are in your engine and radiator and hoses and stuff. And even factory cars, if you let the coolant go too long, it'll just turn to this nasty sludge and you got rust through the whole thing. And try and flush one of those sometimes. It can be a chore.
Any opinion on the deionized versus distilled conversation that comes up from time to time, guys?
That really doesn't matter so much, but as long as you have distilled water that is clear of the minerals, it's better than having something with the minerals. And the minerals attach to things that create spots where it can hold heat instead of releasing it. The distilled water will cool a couple degrees cooler. Don't think it's anything drastic. It's not like 20 degrees. It's like 5 degrees at the most, but it does cool better being distilled than being tap water with chemicals and stuff in it.
I just sent Keith Farron a link to the meeting because he seems to have a bunch of good info on this stuff.
That'd be good to have him.
Well, the other thing
Ryan's sitting here bitching about not having the link, and I sent it to you in your personal message, Rye Klemp.
Well, we should also address race cars that aren't allowed to run coolant, where you have to run water. And in a race car, of course, you just run pure distilled water and then put a bottle or two of your we'll call it water wetter because Redline I think was the first, but I like the VP stuff, VP cool down. Water wetter, Royal Purple has one, Prestone has one, but it's just a surface tension modifier and it also has anti-corrosion additives. But put a bottle or two of that in with your distilled water, and that's fine for the NHRA rules.
Lucas Oil sells a racing coolant also. Yep. That is legal, and it works really good, actually. I've used it, and I have to say it's really nice. And it's easy for them to clean up, but it still provides all of the protection, so it's good stuff.
Yeah, I've run that, or Xerox and a couple of the other companies have NASCAR, quote, approved super coolants, meaning it won't prevent anything from freezing, but it has the lubricants, it has the surfactants, meaning the water wetters, and all of that.
Whoa, that was a massive word, surfactants.
Thank you, Rye.
Yay, Mr. Klemp.
And the bottom line is that is worth about 20 degrees of down the road operating temperature versus straight water. So for my...
Can we talk about the process for getting your cold starts right on a standalone? I mean, my method? Or... does it matter?
Are we talking about coolant right now, or are we talking about cold start?
Well, you were talking about coolant. Sorry, at some point I wanted to back up because I know people want to talk about that. So carry on and talk about coolant as long as you like.
Okay. So my personal experience in my own car, I have seen zero difference between distilled and tap water because I have an aluminum radiator and an iron block. And I have actually encountered that the phenomenon of the aluminum that, sometimes in certain coolant systems, if you don't have if you try to run just straight distilled water, I had severe corrosion of the aluminum components because I had, sometimes you put like a sacrificial anode, is it, or a cathode? I don't know. You're getting into chemistry. I don't remember that far back into my classes, but I encountered the properties of dissimilar metals, and when you have the anode and cathode, and then the BS in between electrolysis, yada, yada, yada. Sometimes you're going to encounter problems that even distilled water is not going to correct. It just depends on the way you have your car set up. So take everything with a grain of salt. You got to figure out what kind of works for you. But long story short, like everybody else in here, I'm sure has already said, running antifreeze on a race car on a racetrack is bad news no matter how you cut it. If you have some running distilled water or tap water and it's corroding your stuff, you should flush it out on occasion from here to there, just to make sure that you're not dumping a bunch of antifreeze on a racetrack should you have a catastrophic failure. Or not.
And drink. Awkward silence.
No, and that's thank you, Rye. That's completely correct, and something that half the cars going down a track, even at drag week, forget about, because that's not something they check for, but they should. Track guys, the second worst thing to clean up in the world is antifreeze.
So Mike Perduto has a good point out. He says put a brown on your radiator if it's rubber isolated. That's actually not
there's somebody on YouTube, and I love Mike. He's one of me and Bewley's best buddies. He comes to all our classes in Florida, but somebody's giving him a hard time because their car he tuned doesn't cold start well. We are in Florida. What do you expect? Those guys are like, man, it got down to 51 last night. I had to work on my cold starts. Shit, 51. I'm out there in a tank top.
Mark needs to shut up and worry about the steering wheel and the shifter. That's all he needs to worry about.
Mark, what you're talking about actually might bring up a good point, because so my particular car, and obviously you might just give me a moment of enlightenment right there, because my car, I run hard aluminum lines or aluminum tubing for my radiator lines, with just like silicone couplers between the radiator and the line. And then, you know what I'm saying? And those lines are kind of cut, so they're tight. So they pretty much they barely touch the radiator, and they barely touch the inlet of the water pump on the block. And then just use silicone couplers to secure them, because there's no flex there, but there might be the transmission of electrical current through there. And that might be what's giving me the corrosion problems that I've been encountering from time to time. So if you can isolate the radiator, which is aluminum in most race car applications, from the iron block via a rubber hose, that would probably alleviate a lot of your problems by running distilled water. But water, in some way, shape, or form, it will pick up minerals from the block or from whatever the case, the aluminum radiator, and it can conduct electricity eventually. So that electrolysis does exist, can be a problem. Hey, my wife's called me. I'm going to put my kids to bed. Be right back.
Yeah, so as Kyle Hunt has just posted, you can put grounds on your grounds and solve everything. Actually, the what you use in the water is important to that. And I spent a lot of time with Jeff Smith, formerly of CarCraft, a long time, because he used to deal with that. And he came back with sounds odd, but ground on the radiator, or at least some kind of electrical connection back to the engine. So if you're actually having that problem, that's one way to solve it. Regarding cold starts, Scott, what is the magical cold start process?
Really, it's playing the price game. It's like Price is Right. You try more, you try less. I start off with the warm start advice. So get the engine warmed all the way up on a hot day, whatever. Look at your pulse width in milliseconds, because every system, no matter what you're using, if it's a factory ECU, if it's a Megasquirt, if it's a Holley, whatever, they all speak milliseconds of pulse width. And if you're running the typical 210-pound injectors like most of us, or you've got some 60s or 100s, you'll be somewhere around, and again, it depends on the fuel you're running, but just somewhere around 1.1 milliseconds for gasoline on huge injectors to 3 or 4 milliseconds at idle. But find out what your happy warm idle is, okay? Then make your warm startup cranking fuel double that. If you're idling at 1.3 milliseconds, crank it at 2.6. The thing should light right off. Now, be aware of what your after start enrichment is doing. Both Holley and some of the other guys put in way too much default after start enrichment, which will make the engine stumble around too rich until, maybe 5 to 10 to 15 seconds before it stabilizes. I like to just get that stuff completely out on a port injected combo when it's warm. You don't need a lot of after start enrichment, but make sure you understand what that's doing. Now, get your cranking pulse width to be about double what your warm idle pulse width is. That'll start. Then work backwards from there. Next time you start the motor when it's colder, it's always going to want more fuel. And E85 at the coldest temperatures down to 0 or below Fahrenheit, you may want as much as 3 to 4 times pulse width when all is said and done. Don't be afraid to add more, especially on ethanol. Gasoline might be 3 times or 300%. So maybe that 2.6 millisecond pulse width at warm cranking now became 7.8 milliseconds or 8 milliseconds of cranking with that big 210-pound injector on gasoline, C16, whatnot. There's kind of a generic curve you can work with there. And then once you get it to light, now remember your cranking pulse just gets the thing to fire initially. Beyond that, then your after start enrichment will keep it running. For those 2 or 3 of you on here that have ever actually started a cold car with a carburetor. Now remember, your grandma was a master at this on a Sunday morning going to church in the wintertime. She knew to pump that thing 3 times. She knew that once it lit, turn the key, light it, then you got to feather the throttle a little bit, maybe pump it a little bit more for a couple seconds until it starts to keep running on its own. That's what your after start enrichment does. So you get that going, then you kind of phase it in. But I like to watch the injector pulse width. Your cranking number will be your highest. Hey, Evan, somebody said sound is going away again. Make sure we're still good. Your cranking pulse width will be your highest number. Then your after start enrichment will be some percentage until you taper down.
It's not going anywhere.
All you have left. Say what?
It's not going anywhere. It's either their end or they're just hearing your phone going in and out a little.
No problem.
You're moving around on your microphone a little bit, and the levels are going up and down.
I am?
At least that's what I hear on my end as well.
Okay, sorry. Hold on.
But it's not a big deal.
Okay. No, cool. I just, you literally start off your cranking pulse, whatever temp you're at is going to be the highest thing. Then it's taper down to your aftershot enrichment, and then anywhere from 5 to 15 seconds of tapering down into where the only enrichment you have is the coolant temp based enrichment. And again, I'm speaking to standalones. Now, honestly, if you want to get a lesson in kick-ass cold start tuning, take a stock ECU, okay, a bone stock LS. Take it out in minus 20 degrees, take it up to Fargo and park it overnight or park it in the freezer. And then take a look at go log with your HP tuners. I mean, you don't need to license it to log something. You just need the cable. You can even do this with a cheap OBD scanner that'll display injector pulse width that you can get for $30 from an AutoZone nowadays, an Actron. I've got this Actron that I paid $100 for that's a kick-ass logger. But I'll look at factory ECUs. I'll look at a factory ECU injector pulse width for cranking and then warm up and then idle, and then try to duplicate that on the standalone or get an idea. It gives you a rough idea of what the injector pulse width is. And you can scale it by injector. So you got a factory ECU that's got 40-pound injectors, so it idles at 4 milliseconds and cranks at 20 or something stupid. You can still scale that all down for your injector size, but take a look at what a factory ECU is doing. I mean, those guys spend $150 million sending people out to cold weather and to do all this modeling and tuning and stuff. Those factory calibrators are not dumb people. So you can log the injector pulse width in milliseconds and look at what they're doing and kind of get an idea, and that'll get you in the ballpark. Duplicate that with your cranking and after start and warm up enrichment on your Holly. Good to go. That's my lecture.
Another good thing to think about when you're doing that is to not necessarily get wrapped up by the pulse width numbers. A lot of people get too involved staring at their wideband, trying to figure out exactly what the engine is doing. And sometimes you really just have to ignore what the gauge says and just go by what the engine reacts to. You can tell
it doesn't hurt to watch manifold vacuum.
Well, you can tell pretty much right away whether or not you have enough fuel in your cold start just by how the engine sounds when it starts. If it just kind of stumbles and loafs and barely gets going, you plain old just don't have enough fuel in it. Throw another 15-20% in there and see what it does.
Yeah, I like that. Do it in percent. And by the way, guys, that's Keith Varon from 64-Bit Tuning. I invited him on here in the last minute because he ain't dumb. I'm just going to leave it at that. Nice, thank you, Keith. Good point.
Yeah, so that was something that I messed with a lot with my car, and I was having all kinds of problems with my factory ECU when I was trying to get the 210s to work. And obviously, I'm the odd duck here. I'm the guy that runs all the small block Ford stuff. So my factory EEC computer did not like the 210s at all. But once I got away from the factory computer, it was just for the first, I guess, month that I was putting the computer together, putting the car together rather, I didn't even have a wideband hooked up. I didn't have all the wiring done, and I was just, give it a crank. It would stumble a little bit, like, oh nope, drop a little bit more fuel in there, and then you get that nice hard crisp start, and then it would phase out. And it's like, all right, I've got the cranking fuel done. Now it's time to start working on the after start enrichment. And it was just, keep putting it in until it would stay running, and just work on it from there.
I have a pretty typical set of Holly tables I flashed up there a little bit ago. I can flash them up again. This was kind of an LS motor-ish engine that, see if I can make this go back again. That was, you can see where the starting enrichment on this vehicle was about 7 to get it fired up crisp. Literally could reach in the window, hit the button, and it would go every time, instant, quick. And more down cold, as you can see, the colder it got. And we only got to tune this down to about 40 or 30 degrees, and we never saw any colder than that, but you can just kind of follow the trend. The after-start enrichment is a percentage of how much extra fuel it needs to add, and that decays over time, right? And so over this much time, it decays down and becomes a 0% extra and goes back to regular fueling. So, 10 seconds is kind of a standard thing. If you fire up your OEM stock vehicle, you'll notice a flare in the beginning, and it takes it a few seconds for it to settle down. And part of that is a routine that makes the RPM a little bit higher to get it going, and also part of that is a little bit of fuel enrichment to keep it going until it settles in and actually has enough temperature to really hold itself.
Oh, now Perduto's making fun of me because I said, watch your manifold vacuum.
How much of this veers over into sort of the opposite end of this, where you're dealing with having to do flood clear? I'm thinking a little bit about what happens when you stall it coming out of the burnout, those type of things. So it could be a cold circumstance. Any little tips for people trying to kind of balance those different things or figure out what they're doing with the tune?
Yeah, don't have it so it stalls when you come out of the burnout box.
Yeah, if it stalls out of the burnout box, you have something else wrong. That has nothing to do with the rest. That's part of your base fuel and your idle routine of coming back to idle, because obviously it came from wide open throttle or part throttle, whatever you do your burnout at, came from that down to nothing suddenly of slamming the throttle shut. And it needs a little extra air. That's usually idle air control, or possibly leaving it to where it automatically idles a little high anyways if you don't have an IAC to be able to catch that.
Asking for a friend.
I like to just keep my foot on the brake.
Hang on, let me throw something out that was happening with some Pro Stock cars that I saw them doing, Scott. They were dipping down RPM after the burnout so low because of this horrible throttle body they're forced to use that it was actually going down into cranking fuel. And a quote-unquote popular tuner that was providing tunes for a lot of these cars, they were stalling after the burnout because it would dip low enough. He had the crank to run RPM set at like 1,100 RPM. Really needed to be like 400 RPM. And so they would dip down below 1,100 RPM while idling at 1,400. And these things would go into cranking fuel and flood themselves out. You'd have to sit there and hold them wide open. Then when they'd light, they'd wang up to 10,000 RPM because they'd so much throttle area. It was actually pretty hilarious to see. But that was their issue. So always take a look at your crank to run RPM and make sure that's sane. To me, that's 400 or 500 RPM on pretty much everything.
I'm usually down between 300 and 400.
No starter is going to crank it faster than 400 RPM. So there you go.
I've run into that quite a few times with some of the vehicles that I've run into. I've seen, 700, 750, 800 RPM cranking thresholds, and it's like, what are you doing there? If you don't have a heavy cam in the engine, if it's a fairly mild build, you might have that car idling down to 600 and 650 RPM, like it was a stock vehicle, and the person who's working on it or owns it ends up chasing their tail. They get all frustrated because they don't know what's going on, and it just turns out to be whoever initially touched or initially set it up just completely bypassed the fact that the starter will never get the engine going that fast, and they just let it ride, and it causes all kinds of issues.
So
Several people were. Go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say, Andrew Williamson wants to know how much can we learn about what an engine wants on a cold start by looking at a Gen 4 LS stock tune? Just poke around in HPT tuners and all of the main tables and adders and get an idea of what really needs to go on? We don't have I thought we had Shore on here tonight.
I don't see him on here. He was going to dial in, but he hasn't yet.
I can tell you that you can look at those base files and get a starting point from them if you can make the translation to whatever software you're using. But GM uses
better to look at the logs.
GM uses a lot of extra tables that aren't labeled like you're used to seeing in your Holly and your Mega Squirt. So figuring out how to translate those is really the true challenge. You can do it. It's not easy. It's not easy to do. It's much easier to push the numbers up and down until it fires off, get it running, get it up to temperature, look at that idle pulse width, go back, and then work on the idle side to smooth it and fine-tune it to get it right.
I think there's a lot to be said for the comment someone made earlier about how the engine sounds and relative happiness. Now, admittedly, that takes a little bit of experience with how happy engines sound and all of that, but I think people have a better, like Grandma has a better instinctive knowledge of that than maybe we give ourselves credit for and we can get too wrapped up in it. And my props to Tom Vigue for bringing this all back to white pump cams and pink pump cams for those who know something about Holly, Bell enrichment. But I personally, having come from a carbureted world once upon a time, found it useful to think in terms of what the carburetor did, as well as, for that matter, what a distributor that had vacuum advance and all of that did, to think about what tables would look like, especially when you talk about Excel enrichment and some of these other things. The fact of the matter is cold start enrichment was called choke. So some of those things apply, some of those don't, but it's not too bad to think about what we used to do. That's not one of mine.
This is that tonight. I have to get T-Rex down here and talk to him.
No, I've got Wyatt here chewing on my arm right now because he wants to play ball, but he's not barking. Anyway, so there were...
well, whoever's dog is going nuts, mute yourself, but go ahead.
There were a couple of other questions. One earlier, Daniel Brummett, I think, was asking about location for fuel temp sensors. Anybody have any comments on that? Does that play into any of this that we were just talking about in terms of fuel temperature?
Before we jump off of that, can I just say one thing? I want to, maybe it's already been visited, talking about cold start, warm up, and enrichment and all that stuff. Just to revisit, we've talked about it before in the podcast, dumb it down for the people, say it again for the people in the back. Don't focus on your air fuel ratio. I'm not the tuner. You guys are the tuners on here, but don't pay attention to air fuel.
I don't use AFR much for startup. In idle, I go by feel and vacuum, honestly.
Reaffirm to a lot of these new people that may not know, you cannot hurt your car at idle while you're messing with the air and fuel. Right?
Especially if you're dealing with something that has a short exhaust or open headers or all the other things people tend to do.
Or a big boy cam.
Yeah. Or
you got one of Bewley's cams. I tell people don't never worry about what your O2 says at idle. You tune it by feel.
Yeah, because
play with it. Give it what it wants to
due to reversion and all that. So
yeah, give it what it wants. I do it by feel. If you've got the big Bewley cam in there, or whatever, you don't. Reading the O2 can be the wrong way to target that. It needs to be a thing that's by feel. I tell people don't tune a big cam engine or anything bigger than stock cam. Don't use the O2s at idle, and don't use them till 14, 15, 1600 RPM.
My shit makes a very good manifold vacuum for the size.
It does. No, it does. No, not getting offensive. But
what I'm getting at is
you guys tune your cams to 12.5 to 1 at idle for warm up, thinking that's good, and then they wonder why all the plugs sit out.
The thing only makes the thing only makes an inch and a half of vacuum, and then if they ignore that and start paying attention to manifold vacuum primarily, they can play with it and it'll come up to 6 or 7 inches of manifold vacuum. The best place for your idle to be is whatever gets you the most manifold vacuum. That's the most efficient point that the engine can idle at.
What I'm trying to reiterate to people is for the people that are trying to get to where you're talking about, the people are trying to get there at that inches of vacuum or whatever KPA that you're saying, this is ideal or this is where you should be roughly.
Lean that sucker out until it makes the most vacuum.
Yes.
at idle.
Lean it out.
Don't be afraid of hurting the motor at idle. You're never going to run it too lean at idle or even light cruise to hurt it. Lean the fucker out until it dies and then put a little bit back in. It's going to be real close to perfect. And do it warm first. Get your warm tune where it starts and idles good warm first. Worry about that cold stuff after that. You'll never get the cold stuff right until your warm VE table and everything else is good.
See, I've got to give a little shout out to this little place I know called Little John's Motorsports. Because when I did the 5.7 that's in my wife's Tahoe, I did a LJMS Stage 1 truck cam. And at 34 degrees below zero this morning, it popped right off, and it idles perfect. It gets about a half mile a gallon better than the stock 5.3 used to. And it's making over 300 at the tires through stock manifolds and catalytic converters.
When you change engines in your wife's Tahoe, you change the displacement from 5.3 to 5.7. You put a cam in it, and she can't even tell that you changed the motor in the car.
Yeah, she didn't know the difference unless you know, obviously if you stand on it, there's a difference. But just driving around,
she drove it for what, a week before you told her you could put her new motor in?
No, she knew I put a new motor in. She just didn't know that it was cammed. But there's just over 20,000 miles on it now.
Nice.
So, and that
little Stage 1 truck cam's a beast.
It does real well, but like I said, all day long I was driving it today in well below zero temperatures, and it runs just like a stocker. It runs great.
Yeah, that's what all the DOD delete guys get. That cam's like, in a normal 5.3 truck, that cam's like 50 horse every time. I think I've even seen it, even with stock manifolds without the bolt-ons and stuff, it's 30, 35 horsepower gain over stock.
Yeah, I'd actually like to see what it would do with headers, but you know, it's just Mama's truck. She doesn't need headers.
Well, hell, it made 300 to the tire through stock manifold. That's, to me, I think that right there is something.
Yeah, no, it did real well. Very happy with it.
Yeah, Mark, your time is better spent drinking bourbon, listening to that beautiful stereo you have, than putting headers on Mama's truck. Sorry, Mama, if you're listening.
No, she's upstairs with the doggy.
Is it her turn to play ball?
Yeah, I get the dog all day. She gets her in the evening. Justin France, everyone needs headers. Yes, everyone needs headers, just not on Mama's truck.
Yeah, just so they can have a leaking gas.
Rick Tapp, what's a stock 5.3 truck make at the wheels? Yeah. Well, I don't know, but they make 290 at the crank.
Rick's a nerd. Just a heads up.
Okay, I was going to say, whoever said everything needs headers is obviously somebody in their 20s, because trust me, when you get to be 45 years old, you wish that everything in the world would make all the power it needs on stock exhaust manifolds, because headers suck.
Let me go back to Rick Tapp here. But so a stock 5.3 makes 290 at the crank. This one was making 305 at the tires on a Mustang dyno, which is, I'm going to say, around 385 at the crank, 390 at the crank. That's
for what transmission is it?
4L60.
Yeah, that's about right.
You know, so 385, 390 at the crank, in a car that is absolutely driven daily, commutes to work back and forth, and is getting better mileage. I mean, it's almost 100 horse stronger than stock and getting better mileage. Think about it that way.
That's a win.
Yep.
Hey, Andrew Williamson has a question. Does anyone want to talk about cranking spark, the other third of the equation?
Sure.
Fuel and air. It says I see 14 degrees down to 4 or 5 degrees.
I'm a 0 degree guy if you've got coil packs. Just going to say it and throw it out there. The factories almost all crank them at really low timing numbers. It obviously, I'm curious what Evans has to say, and Bill and everybody else. Bill's got a big, inefficient, big block Ford that probably wants 20 degrees. I just look at the burn rate versus cranking on RPM, the crank speed, and I know that you're always safer with less timing, and you can take her down to 0 if you have coil packs. You got to be worried, first off, if you have a distributor, do you have phasing concerns? We talk about that a lot on here. I won't bore you guys about that, but I'm curious, what else do you guys do?
Well, the taking the timing out is going to increase your cranking speed, which always helps starting. Some engines, when you get enough camshaft in them, they don't have enough cylinder pressure where having advance in it is going to hurt cranking speed. But it all comes down to pumping losses. And at that slow of an engine speed, if you light the spark off at 34 degrees before top dead center, you're creating a lot of pressure against the piston coming up, and it's going to slow the cranking speed. So, follow what the factory does. If, until you get a lot of camshaft in it, you don't have any cylinder pressure, then you're going to have to add a little timing and cranking.
For my 598 in a big block, it likes 10 at cranking and then immediately ends up at its base 20 as soon as it lights off. So, that's just one little data point. With a relatively efficient chamber, thank you very much. It likes 26 degrees, mean best. But that's one data point on one.
My bad. I called it inefficient. It's actually pretty good. Yeah.
Having fun with you. Anyway, but that's just one data point on a, half-assed, pump gas motor.
I usually start low, and depending on the motor and what's going on with it, sometimes it does need a couple of degrees, sometimes it doesn't, but I usually start around 5 or 10 degrees, and either I end up down closer to 0 or I end up close to 15, but I'm hardly ever above 15. Like, I've never seen a reason. The only reason that you would ever be higher is because you have a car with a locked-out distributor and you don't have any choices. You have some kind of old-school race engine with carburetor, distributor, and standard points ignition and, mechanical advance, then maybe your cranking timing is going to be different because you get what you get when you have hardware that limits you.
Yeah, I think these things are so hugely combination and engine dependent. But the bottom line is,
well, and I've run an awful lot of cars with locked out distributors, and I've never had a problem starting. But at the same time,
remember that time you switched to a carburetor after we'd been doing EFI for a couple days and forgot to pump it?
That's just where I was going with that.
That was the best thing ever. Why won't it start?
God damn it, that was funny. You can tell the story if you want.
No, it's funny because when I tell that story, I'm usually talking about the fact that I spent 2 or 3 days making a harness and wiring up all your EFI and got this thing to run great. And then you spent 15 minutes installing it. Sorry, there's somebody's making a bunch of noise.
Who's ever assembling an IKEA desk, mute yourself.
In the background, everybody mute yourself if you're not talking, please. So.
It is not me. I am cooking and I've been muting myself.
Well, did everyone
perfect.
Go on?
Now no one's talking. That was
and
everybody feels good.
Everybody froze. I have a mental picture right now of everybody stopping what they're doing, like
that's
dangling precariously. Like, my ass now, or
Mark wanted me to talk. Yeah, Mark wanted me to talk about that story. Anyway, it was just kind of funny. We spent 3 days doing an EFI install and got everything to run great. And then his goal was to test. He was really trying to do a carb versus EFI in an Engine Masters Challenge application, which one would score the most points. And he had pre-worked with the guys with Mike Laws or Bo or somebody at BLP who makes, NASCAR level quality carburetors. And, we did the EFI and that took 3 days. And if you were paying at an hourly rate, there's thousands and thousands of dollars in making this thing work good. And then Mark's testing the same engine on carburetor. It takes him 15 minutes to plunk this BLP carb bomb and plumb the fuel system low pressure. And the thing, it's funny. He went to start it and he'd been used to working for EFI for a couple of days and I've got him spoiled starting like a minivan. He's hitting the starter, nothing's happened. I'm like, dumbass, it's a carburetor. You got to pump it a couple times. He pumps it, the thing lights off, and now it ran amazingly perfect. And I was always blown away by that carburetor. I mean, it's really just as good as the EFI. I mean, it was a couple of EMC points down or something stupid, which amounts to, tenths of an average horsepower. But it was just funny because Mark forgot really quickly. It was his first time doing EFI, and he got so used to just hitting the starter and it lights right off, starts itself, yada, yada, yada. That was about the only difference, though. Anyway, funny story. You had to be there.
It was actually our second EFI project together. The first one was the David Weisnard engine. Yeah,
but that was with that electromotive one, and that one was a kind of a pain in the butt, and it didn't really count to me.
Experience.
It didn't count to me.
But we'll touch more on that later. Maybe. We've got to talk about next week. We've kind of got a major announcement to make about next week's podcast.
Is it major?
Well, I think it's pretty major. It's kind of exciting.
I'll just tell them I wanted to give kind of back to the community here. I thought it was pretty cool. You guys have helped us out in the last couple of months and stuck through cold winter times and weird things, and the thing's growing, which is crazy. So, I don't know. We thought we would do some cool stuff to give back to the community, and for live listeners, now we haven't quite figured out the whole detail yet, but we will by next week. We're going to have some kind of drawing from the live listeners, and the first thing we're going to give away is a free hour of remote standalone tuning by me, since I do that. So somebody's going to get some free standalone help with normally $130 value. And then also we're going to have our RealTuners Radio 2019 podcast listener T-shirts available. We got a design we're working on and have that out. So we're going to give some of that stuff away too. Just kind of start giving some stuff away. So the first thing is going to be, I'm going to give out some free tuning. Then we're going to give away some T-shirts next week. It's going to be something to do with live listeners. And I don't know, maybe something about who asks the best question live, something like that. We'll figure that out and we'll announce that next week. We'll kind of wing through it. But anyway, so tell your friends listening live, or maybe don't tell your friends so you have a better chance. But yeah, so we're going to do something like that next week.
While you were talking, there's a listener on Mixler that is talking about building boost, Scott. And let's see here. Oh, hang on.
Who's saying that? Is this Blair?
Yeah. And he was talking about pulling timing out to build boost. But as I understand it, don't you want to leave your timing at where you make max torque to get?
I leave it there to start with. That's what I tell guys. And then it depends what fuel you're on. If you're on alcohol, you'll get more benefits from chopping timing. Are you on a distributor, Blair? I see all the questions you're asking.
Taking timing out of a turbo motor until it gets on a two-step.
Okay. So once it gets on your limit RPM, well, make sure your limit RPM, and a lot of it's got to do with your converter too. That's a tough question to answer. I mean, if you can get this 2JZ's, probably got a loose converter, I'm going to guess.
2JZ with a manual. It's a manual.
Oh, 2JZ with a manual? Cool. Okay, so get that sucker up at a higher RPM where it's moving some air. I mean, this goes back to like what Larry Larson was doing with his Lenco, and I mean, he was on a distributor, and he would just let it go straight to an MSD style cut whatever timing it wants randomly to hold that RPM. What ECU are you on, Blair? He's like LS style truck coils. Okay, so he's on a standalone of some kind.
Megasquirt.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, Megasquirt. Okay, so. Is it not holding RPM, or is it not building?
This is what he said. He's tried as low as 15 degrees. He's gone between 38 and 4,200. He just can't seem to get it to build anything.
When it's on the limiter, you're not jerking enough. When you do an anti-lag
back to 0 or more,
you need to drop that. I know guys that have an anti-lag strategy in their car that are manual transmission. They're 4,000 RPM. They're 10-to-1 air fuel ratio, and they're negative 10 degrees of timing.
He's saying it's negative 15, but I don't know if that means he's pulling 15 degrees.
I think he's pulling 15 is what he means. I think you can go 0 and then 15 beyond that.
The problem with doing that with a distributor is the swing on the anti-lag is so much that you'll get the rotor out of phase.
My thoughts are 4,200 RPM isn't enough for a motor that small.
Correct. That was my next thought, was honestly, Blair's might try it like 5,000. And then if you're worried about too much power blowing tires off, start off with a launch limiter based timing retard so that 5,000 RPM doesn't blow tires off. Say you're pulling 10 degrees of base timing once you let off the clutch, and then phase it back in for anywhere from 3/4 of a second to a full second.
We should really get we've got Mike Head, our friend from Engine Master, Scott, and he's got some really good video of his small block Mustang launching and clutch tuning, and he's letting the clutch go, I think, at 6,800 RPM, and if we could get that video up of, he's got the video of the tack and letting the clutch go and how he manages the engine RPM with the clutch, I think that would be informative here.
Gotcha.
Well, so because he's on a mega squirt, and he's saying, and now I think there's something maybe lost in translation here. He's saying that what he's talking about is negative 15 degrees. When you're looking at the mega squirt and the launch control setup on a mega squirt, it says, soft limit retard timing to a certain degree, not like take away this many degrees from wherever it is on the table, right, which is kind of different.
It depends how he has it configured too.
Yeah. So that's the thing, is that there might be something lost in translation there. Like,
there might also be an issue with the fuel, because if he's doing that, he's still trying to do it and not put fuel in it, and there's no extra fuel to sustain the combustion in the exhaust manifold. It's just going to
nothing to get the pops and bangs going, right?
And you've got to add fuel and take the timing out at the same time. You can't.
Blair, get me to do a remote, man. I'll get that sucker going for you, or you won't have to pay. Contact me offline. Send me a message on Facebook, dude. We'll get you going. I know how to get a 2JZ to spool. If not, we'll get Delgado on the case. But yeah, we'll get that sucker to spool.
Yeah, Blair, ask better questions. Maybe you'll win
next week. He did good. He asked a lot of questions. I want to help this guy out, man. It messages me on Facebook, dude. We'll get that sucker going.
A GT3582 ought to light off just instantaneously on something like that. It seems like he's put a shorter than stock piston in it, only being 8.5 to 1 static. I thought that motor was a lot higher compression than that.
Yeah, John, like you're saying in there, he definitely has to get a little bit more fuel into it. And on the Mega Squirt, there is a launch fuel adder remove. So
correct.
You can have it add either one bank, both banks, and then once he enables that, he can add the fuel by pulse width milliseconds just to be able to throw a little bit in there. So if he dials it in and the boost isn't coming up fast enough, you can try putting a little bit more fuel in there. If it starts to bottom out, then it's just too much.
Agreed. And he's got the right tool. He's got MS3X, which is great. I mean, there's no way there's not an option. We'll get that working. I told him to email me, man. We'll get on a remote and knock that out in 5 minutes.
In my opinion, there's really not a mechanical layout of that turbocharger or combination of that turbocharger that you shouldn't be able to get up, even if you have the excessively large, like 105 AR turbine housing, which doesn't need being 8.5 to 1 compression.
That sucker alive.
Even with a 105 AR housing on it, which in my opinion is a mechanical mismatch, but you should still be able to light it off pretty quick. You just might have to be banging it at 5 with fuel and the timing out. They'll get it figured out.
Yeah, well, it's funny, before we had all the fancy strategies of the new standalones, what we used to do is we'd run the MSD 2-step just to get the spark dropping out. And we would wire in, somebody said it before when we were talking about cold start, we would wire in a relay onto the IAT and program in the fuel ladder based on the intake air temp at minus 40 degrees to be able to add enough fuel to be able to get the burn in the exhaust. So you'd put the car up on a 2-step and you'd hit the button to kick the relay, and you'd see a minus 40 intake air temp, and you'd be able to dial in how much fuel you wanted to get that boost, and to be able to get everything spooled up and get it going. And then the way you have the circuitry done, as soon as you let off the clutch or whatever and go to take off, your IAT would pop back in, 2-step would shut off, and you'd be gone.
Yeah, I've seen it done with like an actual, like one of the old individual injector stands that you weld on the intake pipe, where the MSD triggered a relay to turn that injector on to put the fuel in. Like, that's going way back before the math trick.
Everybody's saying, well, I never saw that on YouTube.
Sorry, I'm over here answering questions. Justin Franz asked a little bit ago about how do mechanical pumps of fuel affect the fuel and such. For startup, we get about 3 PSI of pressure with the help, but not the standard 50-60. I'd say get a better primer and some check valves, like Keith Barron said. I usually need at least 10 PSI to get decent startups on a alcohol motor.
You can really the one thing you can do is you can create, at least in the Holly and several other ECUs, you can create a fuel offset table that fixes whenever there's a pressure difference, and you can make it add fuel based on basically injector math, right? You have a 3-bar injector, you put a 4-bar pressure on it, puts out a different amount of fuel, vice versa. You can do the opposite and work the math backwards so that you can create a table that will compensate for a fuel pressure difference. And when you're expecting to see a 43 PSI start, when it's running and it's on the regulator at 1-to-1 ratio, and suddenly you only have 4 or 5 PSI, you can jack that number up in the fuel correction and the cranking fuel correction table, and you do it in an adder table, and you can make it light off that way. It'll basically make the injector static at that point to get it, and it only works if your injectors are big enough that they can still dump in enough fuel to start it, but it'll still work if that happens. Usually you got to have something to give it a little more fuel, because that number becomes like 800% when you get down that far, and your injector probably can't put 800% more fuel in it to get to where it needs to start, but it's doable. It works to an extent. Like I said, if you have big enough injectors and just enough pressure, it'll still light.
Also known how to turn an EFI car into a carbureted car.
Oh, hush, right.
I mean, it basically is, right? You're going static and you're just relying on it to just put a bunch of fuel in the in the intake and then fire it off.
It's like turning your injectors into a 50cc accelerator.
No, I know. I know what you're saying. I had a problem where like the firmware in my Megasquirt messed up, and it was like causing the injectors. And the way I figured out, the injectors were going static and just like hanging open. And there was a weird thing because when I would unhook the relay to the fuel pump, the car would run and idle. It was just pulling fuel from the injectors. When the fuel pump would turn on, it would flip the thing out. Anyway, doesn't have anything to do with that, but yeah. You know what? Bite me.
All right. You haven't been around for like a month, and we've got a lot of catching up on your aggravation.
Yeah, it's been a month, all right?
It has been a month, and we've missed you.
It's been a month here, too.
Yeah.
You
guys were away. What can we say? I was curious. Daniel Brummett had a question that said, how high is too high on the 2-step RPM when launching utilizing timing retard?
Depends on the torque converter.
My answer was going to be when the damper hub welds itself to the crank, but do you have that was a better answer, John? Can you repeat that?
Depends on the torque converter. Depends on the stall speed of the torque converter and how much what the torque converter likes to have for run at the couple point to get you through the first 50, 60 feet. You know, PTC converters, they like a 400 or 500 RPM run. So you have to know where your converter likes to be. And, you know, you get within a certain point of a PTC torque converter, it just, you know, of that stall point from your launch RPM, and it doesn't do as well as a lower launch RPM to get a little run at the converter to flash it. Because they act, you know, they can act really, really tight. So, you have to know how your torque converter likes to be treated in the first 60 to 100 feet to be able to determine, you know, your 2-step RPM, so on and so forth. That's a really
it's interesting that you bring that up because it really does depend on the converters. Because like my Pro Torque in the wagon is totally different than like the TCI converter we had in it before, and same deal. Like it wants less of a run actually than a PTC like that I'm used to, or to a TCI or even some of the ATI stuff.
The TCI is really like. The PTCs really like to be kind of slingshotted a little bit.
Exactly.
That's what I've come to find out. If you got something that, you know, when you look at your data log and you see that couple point, and you'll see it, it's plain as day on a PTC because it'll lock up so tight that it'll nose engine acceleration over, and it might even dip your engine acceleration a little bit, and then it'll catch up and it'll take off again. So you'll see that little dip in your RPM curve after you let go of the button. And the PTCs like to be 500-600 RPM away from that point. And if you get closer to that point, the dip and you know, when it kicks the motor in the teeth, when it couples up, the dip will get worse. And then the converter will act even tighter. But and then if you bring your launch RPM down away from that couple point, a few hundred RPM, and give the motor a little bit of a run at that RPM point, it'll flatten that dip out and it'll accelerate the car faster. But different converters like different things. You know, PTCs like to have a run. There are other converter manufacturers out there where they'll perform better the closer you get to the coupling point.
Hey, Scott, did you see Don Abernathy's question?
Abernathy? No, what's he asking?
He said he had a scary thing happen tuning his car today. On his first full run, he had boost creep instantly to 20 PSI, and he made almost 950 foot-pounds at 3,600 RPM. He let out quickly, but do you have any ideas how to reevaluate his boost control options? He has dual wastegates with CO2. Does he need bigger gates? Could he have damaged it already?
It totally depends on what it was trying to do. You got to look at the data. Was your system set up wrong? Was it trying to open the gate and release the pressure? If it was, then was it working? Was it successfully working? That just needs diagnostics. My advice is if you don't have a dyno guy or you can't figure it out, that's something where you just get some professional help. That's something I would help with. Spend an hour with us. I'll help you figure that out. But there's too much to say.
Did you say boost creep? I think you mean back half.
It also depends on how it's laid out, depending on if the gates have got good priority.
3,600 RPM, though, man, you're asking for trouble at that low of RPM, that much number. That's a big torque number. That's going to be more than, that's going to be over 1,000 foot-pounds of torque. 1,100 foot-pounds, that ain't good. Fix that. My answer to that is you can't answer that. There's about 20 things I'd tell you to look at, but if I had a data log in front of me, I'd look at it. You know, maybe it's time to farm out, and I'm not just sitting here trying to tell everybody to, hey, spend an hour with me, but that's something I can look at and remote tune and figure out with you, or get a pro to help figure that out, what's going on. You got to diagnose, is the system trying to release pressure there? And, you know, Bewley can tell you all about placement and things like that, but I can tell you all, I mean, he'll send people to me and say, hey, look, the system looks fine. The design is fine. Why is it overshooting? Take it to Clark. Well, and I'll look at the system and be like, dude, you got your freaking, the biggest problem is guys have their fill and empty valves plumbed backwards. One's just overshooting. So it tells me that you don't got something right. Take it back to gate pressure. Don't put any pressure in your dome. Simplify it. If it still does that on gate pressure, then figure out if your gate's not opening up. You know, work from there. But get a pro to help too.
Make sure there's not a stuck gate by taking all the CO2 off and just run it on wastegate only and see what happens.
Boom.
Do you have the wrong spring in it? Do you have, you know, is one of them stuck? It's very, you know, one of them's operating great, the other one's not. Hey, maybe a little rust, a little something in there. It happens. You got moisture in your exhaust when you first fire up your car. It gets all over parts. There's metal in there. It's going to create some corrosion eventually.
You're making me moist.
Like we set up a little bit earlier, Don.
Jeez, Rye.
What happened? Sorry. Was that allowed? And awkward silence. Everybody drink.
Well, I was just answering a question from Matt Sanford. He's just wondering if these super cold temps affect injector latency or coil dwell time. Does it affect it? And I was just answering. I really
not
haven't
enough.
noticed anything.
Not enough to matter. Okay. Awesome. So, well, any other questions before we wrap it up here, guys? We've been at this a while.
Negative.
I see Mr. McConnell, Jeff McConnell is on Mr. Naturally Aspirated Small Block. Let's do it the hard way. I love it.
Is that McConnell you're making fun of?
Yeah. No, I'm not making fun of him. He races the drag week class that I want to do. Small block NA. Yeah.
Look out. It's a tough class, man. You don't got to be just good. You got to be crazy.
Well, yeah, that's why it looks like fun.
Yeah, Jeff asked, what is this boost you speak of? And I think it can accurately be described as a brand name for milkshakes for the elderly.
Somewhere out there, I literally can hear Tom Vigue laughing, and he's not even dialed in.
Right.
Come on.
No,
hey, okay. Now, I love NA stuff as much as anybody, but power adders are awesome. And you can't, just bash on, McConnell, I love you, but dude, it doesn't matter. However you want to make horsepower, just make horsepower. That's all that matters.
Guess who just got a free Pro Charger? Sorry, had to do it. Sorry. Kidding.
Hey,
I don't know what you're talking about. I borrowed a Pro Charger, but thank you.
Chad, my favorite car in the entire world is a Cadillac Escalade that we did a Whipple on.
There you go. I think that's a great deal.
Badass for a daily driver. Because, everybody needs a 700 horsepower SUV for a daily.
Yeah, I agree.
It's what you use when you want to make 2 horsepower per cubic inch.
Exactly. Well, and I'm disappointed though, because I hate it when classes only allow 1 power adder, since I'm so fond of using multiple. And for the 10K drag shootout, we're coming back to defend our title, and they changed it so you can only use 1 because they didn't like us using nitrous and a turbo last time. So we can only have 1 power adder.
So much for doubling up with Cialis and Viagra, and thank you for the comment, Allison.
It just means you're going to have to get a better turbo.
Or maybe we won't do a turbo. Who knows?
Well, belts are for holding your pants up, not for making horsepower. So
I'm not going to argue with you on that. Who knows what power adder we may or may not use.
If you got big into the guys from the southeast of North Carolina, they ain't using. If they're to get rid of the turbo, they ain't using a blower. I'm telling you that right now.
We shall see. There are weight advantages depending on what combo you run. So we are contemplating right now. We are heavy in the planning stages.
How quickly have things gone to hell where you've got weight breaks in the $10,000 drag week challenge? Not that I'm trying to bag on my friends at Power Auto Media.
Not only that, but how much weight do you think is really beneficial? Because there's a lot to be offset by aerodynamic drag, more than weight can offset. And you can turn up the power to overcome that weight offset if you build the motor right.
I agree wholeheartedly. We were never worried about the weight as far as what the total was last time. We were just worried about where it was. The car ended up way lighter than we expected. Yeah, we just cared about putting it where we want. So whatever if they told us that we had to do this and weigh, 4,500 pounds, then we'd be 4,500 pounds and we'd win. That's what we're doing. We're going out same as last time with a plan, and we're going to do everything we can to execute and end up on top again.
As reigning champions, do you get to start over with beer money, or do you have to start with a new car?
No, we have to start with a new car. Oh, yeah. No. We have to start with a new car just like everybody else. So we don't know what the cars are yet.
1978 Plymouth Solari.
Is it going to be the same teams, Chad, or do you guys know?
No. The application process is open. You can go to horsepowerwars.com and check. They're going to do 3 new teams plus us. And so one of those teams will be a dream team, and then the other 2 teams will be who knows who. But nobody from the original, or I shouldn't say that. Maybe there'll be, a team member or something from one of the other teams again. But I don't know. But just depends on who's crazy enough to think this is a good idea.
The cars are all going to be identical 1978 Toyota Cressida wagons. Just a little bit of inside knowledge.
If that was the case, then you know me. Well, 2 things. A, wagon guy, fucking A, bring it. Number 2, it's a rear-wheel drive car, and my dad worked for Toyota and raced a Toyota way back in the day. So I'm down. I'm totally down. I think that a Cressida wagon would look awesome with like a big block with a roost blower sticking out of the hood or something. Oh, or a clear plexiglass hood scoop with some nitrous, whatever.
I think that pretty much wraps it up.
I hope the stinky guys come back.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Guys,
yeah,
of course.
So, not to cut everybody short, but we got to wrap it up. So quick reminder, tell your friends, we're going to give away some free shit next week, next Wednesday. Also, check out our Vegas class. Go to RealTuners.com. I need you West Coast guys to sign up. Chad's going to try to be there. It sounds like he might make it.
I will be there.
Ryan Cunningham's going to be there. Evan's going to be there. So yeah, I mean, I'd like to see you guys. We still got like 8 or 9 seats left for that class. We need to fill that sucker up. So check it out, RealTuners.com. There's a schedule. It's the last weekend in February, or is it the 25th and 6th?
23rd and 24th. 23rd,
24th.
I don't quite have my shiz together yet, so here we're back at the house. Okay, yeah, 23rd and 24th, Saturday and Sunday in Las Vegas at Revolution Street Cars. That's Frank Guerrero's shop, which is going to be cool. Cars on the dyno. It's centered around standalone tuning, but I tell the factory guys this is the class to hit first. If you want to learn the factory stuff, you really should learn the basics, and it's easier to learn with a standalone. And also, just so you know, once you've been to one RealTuners class, it's $100 off for the rest of the RealTuners classes after that point in time. We have a lot of guys taking advantage of that. In fact, this class I had, the Mopar class last weekend at TJ and Bryce's shop in Palm Bay, Florida. All but one of the students were prior attendees, and it went really well. They want to do another one. So we're going to do another Mopar class in a few months in Dallas-Fort Worth. But anyway, that went good. Had a good time. Listen in, tune in for some free stuff next week. We'll figure it out. We're going to give out a free hour of tuning by me, standalone tuning, and we're going to give away some T-shirts just to kind of give back to you guys that have been tuning in and listening to us and making this thing grow. That's all I have. Anybody else?
Hey, remind me, I might have some bang shift swag that's in my stash here in my garage. I think I have some women's stuff actually, so maybe some gifts for the girlfriends or wives.
Be down for that.
That we'll give away next week. Yeah,
that's cool. Cool.
Yeah, so remind me, and I will inventory, and we'll figure it out, and I'll join in on the giveaway.
Very nice. Sounds good. Thank you, Chad. Cool.
Yep.
Thanks all you guys for tuning in tonight. If we missed your questions, hit us up on the podcast fan page, RealTuners Radio podcast fan page, or just hit me up directly. If you guys want to do some remote tuning, give me a buzz. I'm about 2 days booked out right now, but got some times open this weekend. And that's about it. Everybody take care. And thanks again, Evans and everybody else for joining in tonight.
One more shout out. James McEwen and his class. They said another great show.
Yep. Everybody who's taken lessons from James McEwen, you did a good job. He's a good teacher. He likes to talk, but he's good and knows what he's doing. Although he's a Ford guy, we'll let that one slide.
I mean, let that slide. That needs to be celebrated. Obviously.
Hey, you guys
celebrate the Ford.
You guys will be proud of me. I'm going to have a booth at the big car show here in Fargo this year. I'm looking into it, and I think I'm going to have a Ford Mustang on display and a Ford Flathead on display. And Throttles will have a all Ford booth, if you can believe it.
So it's a 40 by 40 room crammed with 6 cars and a beer stand?
No, there'll be over 200 cars. It's the biggest car show in North Dakota. It's a big one.
And over 400 beer stands.
Yes, exactly.
Cue exit music.
Yep. All right, guys.
See you guys.
Thank you all very much. See you guys. Do you want to learn how to tune electronic fuel injection live in person with the guys from RealTuners? We have 2-day courses in dyno shops all across the country. You can register for these at RealTuners.com and click on RealTuners Live Classes. For more information or to make a reservation, go to RealTuners.com or message us on Facebook at RealTuners LLC. Now, about those classes. When are they, you might ask? Standalone EFI Level 1 course, February 23rd and 24th in Las Vegas at Revolution Street Cars. On March 2nd, a special 1-day advanced course at Dynocom Industries in Fort Worth, Texas. April 13th and 14th, a Level 1 EFI course at Endless Performance in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. April 27th and 28th, an advanced class at 417 Motorsports in Springfield, Missouri. May 18th and 19th, standalone EFI Level 1 class at 417 Motorsports in Springfield, Missouri. June 15th and 16th, a Level 2 advanced course in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at Endless Performance. And of course, we will be trying to schedule more classes and more dates throughout the year, so keep checking back for more info.